Right, so today we're going to be doing another tier list, this time of Cuphead bosses. Now, very recently we've done the Cuphead no-hit run, so we're going to do this perspective of, from a no-hit runner's perspective of these bosses, as well as fun and difficulty and all that. So, first of all, number one, probably one of the first bosses come across, the Root Pack. So, Root Pack is a very easy boss, unsurprisingly, being one of the first bosses, if not the first boss you come across. So, it's nice because it has the instant variety, because it has 3 different bosses you have to come across and learn with like the tracking carrot, from the ceiling, and just jumping over. So, quite a nice mix actually. Like goes from horizontal attacks to vertical, from ceiling and tracking. I actually thought about that. It gives a mix of everything. But of course, like being a really easy boss. I'm not really sure how I'm ranking these. It's not really off difficulty, not really off fun, or like just the boss itself. So I'll probably say Root Pack B, because I think it's like a really nice introduction to the game and gives quite a nice variety right at the start. The frogs is likely your second opportunity. These are a bit trickier. Of the first 3 bosses you're probably going to come across, it's going to be like Root Pack or Goopy, and then probably the frogs. The frogs are a bit trickier. There's a bit more going on, and especially in the last phase. I remember the 3rd phase giving me absolute jip during my first playthrough. As well as whilst we were running no hits, it was quite tricky in fairness. Especially the yellow ones, it was hard to get consistent with those. But the red and green variations with the casino was, I'd say, turned out alright. I didn't like how during the no-hit run we found that the EX tags couldn't really speed up too many of the phases. That was a bit disappointing. I'm going to save it all for the 3rd phase. That's one thing I'd probably change. But in terms of the bosses itself, where would I put that? I'd probably put the frogs in front of the Root Pack. Okay, Goopy. This will probably be either your first boss or probably your first boss, because he's the one right next to the shop. Goopy's very simple. Even if it's like your first time, it's the jumping boss. It's made simple, of course, because it's the first one you're probably going to come across. And in the no hits, it was like nothing to worry about. I guess with the final phase, with being the speedy, like sliding around, adds a little bit. But I don't think the boss is much really, and it shouldn't be being the first boss. But I can't give it too much in fairness. So Goopy will be our first C, I think. No like hidden complexities or anything like that, as there is with some other bosses. Hilda. Hilda is an interesting one, because Hilda's like your first experience with the flying levels, and they don't hold back. It's like Goopy and the Root Pack, they like introduce you slowly. They're introducing like the mechanics. The Root Pack's like the slow, his projectiles go along the side and down and track you. Goopy's getting used to dashing under at the right times. Hilda, they throw that all out the window, say, here's a new mechanic, flying, and here's an absolute ton of projectiles to fire at you. I think Hilda's really difficult, especially during the first playthrough, and even during the no-hit run, it took quite a bit of time to get consistent with just the amount of stuff that goes on with Hilda, especially the variations as well. Well, you have to really like with the Zodiac characters, so like can turn into the goat at the start, and then it's either the Sagittarius or the Gemini, which is quite a nice change, having the variety. My first introduction to variety as well. It comes up a lot in the later bosses as well. But yeah, that's it. I quite like Hilda, apart from the fact that it is a very like bullet hell like boss right at the start of the game, especially when you just learn. So I'd probably say Hilda's A, but it's probably going to go in the bottom level of A. But yeah, I quite like Hilda. Yeah, quite a fun boss. Cagney. Cagney, in my opinion, is the trickiest fight of Isle 1. I think Cagney is quite difficult and takes a while to get your head around. A bit of Hilda's quite a lot going on screen, especially when he starts spawning all the different like seeds, like different mobs that track down, the thing that flies in the sky, and the ones at the bottom. I personally found the trickiest, and even when we were doing the no-hit run, I used to do it with like going through the game normally, like doing the Root Pack and frogs, then Goopy and everything, but Cagney kept ending those runs, so we swapped it around, and Cagney turned into our first boss we did every time, just because he was quite a run ender. Especially second phase. Second phase is tricky, especially when starting. Can't go on the ground, and those spikes go through the platforms in Cagney quite quickly. So you have to really learn how to platform quick. But I guess that's why also Cagney is right at the end. In the end, I did enjoy Cagney, the Cagney fight, once we got used to it a lot, but I also wouldn't put it on the same level as Hilda. I think Hilda's got a lot more going on, whilst Cagney's more difficult, I'd say, but I'd say less of interest going on. So I'd probably put Cagney at the top of B. Going into aisle 2. Baroness. Baroness was the Cagney of aisle 2. Baroness wrecked me quite a bit and made me need to put her right at the start. I actually really like Baroness, surprisingly, considering there was a lot of salt build-up with her whilst we were doing runs. But the real fun part, fun quotations in some aspects, is the 5 variations of mini-bosses you can face. So you start off the fight and then you have to fight 3 of the mini-bosses before fighting before fighting Baroness. Which actually, in fact, I hate the actual Baroness fight, the final phase. But anyway, all 5 of the mini-bosses are actually really nice, apart from the waffle. But like, as in, they're all really unique and have something to learn in response to which phase they come in. Because depending on which phase you fight them in, it can be a lot easier. As in phase 1, it's just the mini boss. In phase 2, it's the jelly beans on the floor and the mini boss. And then in the 3rd phase, it's Hilda. I keep saying Hilda, Baroness, firing her gun plus the jelly beans plus the mini boss. So like keeps adding, and you can have really interesting or really difficult combinations between. Like, personally, I found the combination of the waffle and the 3rd phase really difficult because the waffle can get iframes and expanding is quite difficult to avoid if he pins you on the left corner, because then you have to go on the right, which is closer to Baroness and all the stuff that's going on, which was interesting. But if the waffle was at the start, no issues, because you could have the whole arena to do stuff. But like the Jawbreaker or the I can't remember the one that goes into the middle and then sprays a lot of projectiles into the sky. That one was fine in phase 3 because you could always stay on the left hand side, and the Jawbreaker you could just follow around. So it had a lot more variety and a lot more to learn, which I found a lot more interesting. But what did let it down was the final phase. I despise the final phase of Baroness. The head tracking is so weird, especially when so the head chases you 7 times, or chases you 6 times and then flies off screen. But the time between that flying off screen and her throwing the next one can vary so much. You can either have a breather, or she'll chuck it and there's going to be 2 heads on in the arena at the same time. It's drove me mad in some runs. But I don't and I don't think that was like a good way of doing it. Like, it was difficult, but it was difficult for like the wrong reasons. But the variation in mini bosses I really enjoyed. I actually think like those bosses, accompanied by the difficult the stuff that Baroness adds in, made it really interesting to fight the different variations, as opposed to something like King Dice later on, where it's just mini boss by mini boss, each separate. But we'll go into that when we get to King Dice. But saying all that, where would I put it? Baroness, probably a high B. I do think that the final phase of Baroness does pull it back slightly. Djimmi. Djimmi we'll do later, actually. Because we'll go in order of the way I fight them in during the run. So Beppy would be the next one. Beppy's interesting. Beppy's a weird one, because I actually enjoyed the fight, but the way we did the run was where we kept Pea Shooter, which made the second phase really difficult getting rid of the blue mobs, because they could track really well, and the Pea Shooter can only fire in certain directions unless you move. So that combination with the roller coaster, which moves you on the platform, made that really difficult to get used to and to get consistent at. But apart from that, I actually enjoyed Beppy as a boss. The variations between them, like having mobs in second phase. First phase is of course quite simple, just going along the floor with the ducks in the top. But then in the 3rd phase, I think just the introduction of the roller coaster having a moving platform underneath you, was something really well done in this fight. And then final phase is tricky, especially when you first start and like your first experience with Beppy. That final phase is an absolute killer. Quick tip for like that final phase: drop down and get rid of the mobs on the ground, because like 4 of those mobs throw in those baseballs everywhere. It's next to impossible to avoid. So yeah, drop down there, get rid of a few of them. Once we did that, a lot more consistent, but during the first few playthroughs, God minute, that was the hardest phase to come across. Even compared to like Baroness's final phase, that was super tricky. And we're trying to like Matrix Neo dodge all the 4 projectiles as they were going. Where would I put you? I'd say like Grim. Grim, I think, is the hardest boss in IL2. Mainly because of phase 3. Phase 3 with the 3 heads and the projectiles, as well as the clouds moving towards the dragon, is so tricky to get consistent at and to avoid those projectiles. Like the projectiles are coming towards you and you're moving towards the projectiles, so you have like the minimal amount of time to react and avoid and do all that. So harsh, especially considering in the expert difficulty, it flips around. The clouds are going the other way, which makes first phase more difficult, but first phase, like, it makes third phase easier, moving away from you, as opposed to in normal or regular difficulty. I don't get it. Like, it makes it so much more difficult having that minimal amount of time to react. As if that wasn't enough as well, those projectiles in phase 3, if you hit too much, they explode and send out projectiles up and down. And to the sides. So yeah, phase 3, as you may be aware, looks a bit of salt. As well as, yeah. Phase 2 and phase 1. Phase 2 is interesting because phase 2 is difficult, but once you get the trick to it, which is them jumping towards your last position, it becomes a lot nicer. But if you've not got that, it becomes really difficult, as when I started doing the runs, it was just like jumping for anything and trying to make use of the smoke dash a lot. But once we got hang of that, it got a lot more consistent. Although it still is quite difficult trying to get damage off on Grim, because you have to be at a certain angle with the pea shooter. And phase 1's, I think, it's just quite a nice phase, getting used to the platforms. Because I think, is this the first chance? So yeah, you're introduced to like moving platforms in Beppy, and then Grim's like the next step up, where you've got like smaller platforms, moving, and you've got no floor. So I think Grim just brings it out a lot of interest stuff, which again, a bit like Hilda, where it brings in the mechanic of flying. The Grim's like the first one that introduces the idea of not having a floor, so you have to keep platforming continuously on top of attacking, but then throws you into the hardest fight possible with like the final phase of these tracking fireball projectiles. So quite mean studio. But yeah, I quite like Grim. Grim goes in A, I think. I'd probably actually, Grim might be the first S actually, just because even though I think phase 3 is difficult, I don't think it's mostly unfair if you're careful. If you be greedy, you just get punished super straight away. Great English. Wally. Wally. Wally's alright. I don't really have too many thoughts on Wally. I think the variation is quite interesting, and the final phase is probably your first introduction to you having a good use of the bombs. When Wally's on the bottom, you can get above and using the bombs, although it's quite risky doing that because of the amount of projectiles he fires up. We got really consistent with Wally because of the combination we used with the nukes to use iframes during that final phase. So that was really nice in a sense of, Wally was a really nice one to break down and learn like a set pattern for, or like strategy for each of the phases, which I really enjoyed for Wally. But as a boss separate from that, I don't think there's a huge amount going on. Phase 3 is tricky with the small Wally because of the expanding circle of like the spiked eggs. So that's where you have to get used to using the shrunken form quite a bit in order to get close and get out pretty quickly as well. I think I mainly just enjoyed it from being able to go through each of the phases and working out what we're going to do. So Wally probably, yeah, maybe there. Right, the final one of aisle 2, Djimmi. Which still feels weird to say, even though I'm pretty sure that's the correct pronunciation, like Djimmi, like Jimmy from Better Call Saul or something like that. Anyway, Djimmi the Great is, I think, the boss with the most amount of phases. I think he's got like 5 phases, each doing something quite different. I actually quite like Djimmi the boss fight. Like the first, we talked about variation earlier with Hilda's 2 Zodiac variations. Like the start of the Djimmi fight can have 3 different things from his chest: cats, swords, or treasure. The cats absolutely wrecked me, which, yeah. Cats are actually really annoying because like the projectiles, like when they go off screen, if there's one that spawns on the left, it can spawn off screen and then come back onto the screen, which may have got me 1 or 2 times. But then it goes into a sort of platforming section. Second where you have to break open between the walls. Then into ghosts. Then into a marionette. Then into a massive Djimmi. There's just a lot of variations in that fight. Really, really enjoyable. And it was also a really nice one to work out what to do for each one. Also, third phase with that sarcophagus one. The bombs are super handy for that one. Just staying at the top. That was a really nice one to work out because it made it a lot more chill. But the marionette phase was probably the trickiest phase because the final phase you can nuke and pretty much clear up if you keep firing, but the marionette phase is quite tricky because there's a lot to keep track of. Djimmi, I think Djimmi can join Grim. The bee, I hate so much. Phase 3, not even phase 3 actually, phase 2 and 3 caused me so much pain. Like the absolute, well, actually there's 2 worst parts of the bee. The first one is the triangles in phase 2, like that they spawn on you and then they fire projectiles out on the corners, and there's 2 of them. And like they can have such dodgy situations. Like if you're avoiding the first one and then the next one's spawning on you, so you have to get away straight away, and the other one can be attacking you, like staying on screen, and the other one's then following you, and then projectiles, and then moving platforms. Oh my god. And then in phase 3, like we went through it because there's a way to speed up phase 3 by doing a maximum amount of damage in phase 2 through like keeping track of the amount of damage we're doing, and then using all of our EX attacks just before going into phase 3 to speed up phase 3 as much as possible, because phase 3 with those fists, like, super annoying, as well as the size of Hilda's I keep saying Hilda. The bee's hitbox at the bottom, like the plane like takes up the bottom third of the screen. The platforms are moving down quicker, and those fists are just track too well. They can go off screen and return on screen. If you're not keeping track of them, that can be really difficult. And no, I'm like proper ranting right now. The other one is the projectiles that go off screen at the top. Like in the second phase with the bee bullets that go at the top. Once they're just like one layer above screen, you can still jump into them. They still got like an active hitbox right at the top, and like so many runs that we got up there, just didn't keep track, jumped up, we're going, oh, we'll just go through the ceiling, got hit. Which we sort of exploited a little bit in the Grim fight, because in first phase with the fireballs that go up and down, you can actually jump into the ceiling and go over them, so sort of exploited it that time, so it might be a little bit of a karma there, but yeah, was not happy when we got hit by those. But yeah, that in second phase, the triangles in second phase, the platforming, which I think just makes things extra difficult compared to like Grim's like the learning, and it's not too bad, but I just like everything moving down makes it so much harder, and especially on like a really tricky boss. And phase 3 is just horrendous, so much so that we're even trying to like skip as much as possible. I won't do it a disservice by putting it below Goopy, but yeah, might be a bit of salt influencing that tiering, but or that ranking, but yeah, B goes in C. Robot. The weird thing with the robot is we got it very down pats the order that we did it. So there was very little variation in the robot because we all did it so that top, bottom, middle. We saved the nuke for second phase because that got rid of that phase altogether, and then third phase was just the bullet hell, which is just avoiding and using the shrink time. Can't really think too much about this robot because it just became a very systemized boss. During the first playthrough, it's quite a funny one when you do so much to the boss right at the start when you're learning everything. Because in fairness, if you do it in the wrong order, it can make things really difficult, especially the bombs from the bottom that have that really large skull AoE. If you get those early, whilst like the laser's still going on, or the hands are coming out and you still not dealt the lasers, things can go really wrong, really bad, like down south really quick. But the order we got through or made for him made it so much easier. And so that's probably just no hit experience, gonna put him down a bit because it did become a very same boss. Probably below Cagney. I feel like Cagney over Robot. Sally, I don't have too much to say about Sally. It's quite a simple boss, really. Pretty much everything can be smoke dashed. The second phase is tricky because there is a lot going on. There's the mobs that she spawns, which drop down from the ceiling, the baby in the background that drops the bottle. But in terms of Sally herself, everything can be pretty much smoke dashed. The fan can be annoying occasionally. But then even in the third and fourth phase, you're just pretty much dashing past everything. Yeah, I think Sally's just a quite simple boss actually, and not much to be said. So you're probably another C actually. Werner. First of all, everything in first phase can be smoke dashed, pretty much. The fire projectiles that he puts out are quite tricky, but you can get used to that. Alright, the other two you can just smoke dash through. Second phase is tricky as there is quite a bit to keep track of. Many times I've just not kept track and moved into like the wrong level when he's doing like the flamethrower, which you think would be pretty obvious if someone's standing there holding a two-sided flamethrower, as you occasionally see in the walk down the street. You think you'd probably notice where they're at, but yeah, if you don't keep track of that, it can be quite difficult. And then the bottle tops were annoying at the start learning, but they're not too bad. Because like if you're on the top level, the bottle tops just below and just above don't actually hit you even if you're standing, so they're not actually too bad. And final phase, everything can be pretty much smoke dashed. The cat attack, you just move to the other side and smoke dash through the falling projectiles, and you don't even need smoke dash, you can just use normal dash. And then just getting rid of the mice is probably the easiest way, and the way we did it. Let's see, I think as well. Briny I like because he does something different. Briny, like a lot of the other bosses, separate phases and do different things in the phase. Like Sally's a really good example of that. The first two phases add to each other, like second phase adds stuff to phase 1, but then phase 3 and phase 4 are different stuff happening. Briny is really nice because he has one really long phase and then a very short second final phase. But in that one final phase, stuff keeps getting added on gradually as you do more damage. So at the start, you just have to deal with the barrel and Briny firing off projectiles. But then you do more damage and then he starts summoning his various familiars, like the shark and the dogfish and the squid. And then once you get used to that, and you start getting used to that, doing damage and your windows there, then it starts introducing the cannonball from the ship. And I think it's just a new way of fighting a boss in that. It's like, it's stuff, because they're like separate phases within one phase, but it's all adding together without having to have like a separate animation changing things. So I think that was a really interesting thing that I think only Briny really does. Yeah, I think Briny's the only one who really does that all together in one long period, which I really enjoyed. And phase 2 it can be tricky. Hardest thing of phase 2 really is the barrel. The barrel is just in the way all the time. But once we got a hang of having a way to do damage on the right hand side of the fight and on the left hand side of the fight. It turned out being not too bad, because we found a way to avoid the barrel, whichever side we were at, or to avoid an advance and still do damage. So that wasn't too bad at all. But I really enjoyed the first phase with that new like system of learning. So I'd probably put Briny A+, or like high top of A at the moment. Cala Maria is sort of the opposite of Briny, with a different thing as well. Because like Cala has 6 different attacks in phase 1, and they're available to her straight away. Like she can do any sort of variations. The nice breakdown though is that she has 3 different attacks that her herself will do, which is like the red fish, the yellow fish, and the pirates ghost that she spawns. And then there's 3 like environmental attacks, which is like the stuff that comes up from the sea. And there can be like the combination of any of those 3 from set 1 and 3 from set 2. So that's really interesting from no-hit's perspective of learning how to deal with each of those combinations, because that was fun to do. With some being a lot more difficult, such as the pufferfish that rise from the sea, as well as her spawning the pirate ghosts. That's like a really tricky combination, but something like the horse with the fire in the water and the electric fish, that was a really nice combination. So from learning that for the run was really nice, seeing the breakdowns and working out which combinations were good, bad, and how to deal with each of them. Phase 2 is tricky to the point that we came up with a way to speed up it a lot. So we saved up for a nuke, built up for a nuke, both worked really, to try and get rid of that phase, because that's really tricky with the amount of projectiles and the fact that we couldn't find a consistent way to avoid getting frozen and avoid things. So I don't like that phase because we had to resort to that, and there's, as far as I'm aware, there's no better way to do that. You can sort of like hide in the right corner, but in terms of like dealing with her straight on, I didn't really like that we had to like resort to that. But even though that's like what we had to do to make it consistent. But yeah. As well as similar thoughts on phase 3. Because phase 3 we cheesed, because if you're close enough to her head, then her hitboxes won't hit you. Or like the stuff that she fires off won't hit you, so we could sort of cheese her like that. And reason did that is because it's not consistent being on the other side and fighting quotations fairly. Because you can just get frozen, and if you're in the wrong position, or if there's a barrier and you can't break out quick enough, it's sort of a bit RNG, which is a bit unfortunate, because that would be quite nice fight section. But yeah, I had first phase is my favourite. There was most to learn and most to break down, but second and third phase just not really a fan, in fairness. So Cala, I would probably put B. Actually, I'd put B above Cagney. I actually like Cala's first phase enough to do that. Phantom Express. Phantom Express is a longer fight than I thought. I was editing it early and like it goes on for quite a while. But anyway, if I had spread, first phase of Phantom would be so much nicer. But an interesting thing we found out is, or that we used, was the pumpkins that drop the projectiles on the platform to get it to sod off everywhere, like left and right. If we parried like the opposite wheel in first phase, like the left wheel, it then times it out. So that's a good way we use to avoid getting shoved over towards Phantom Express. So that was like a nice little trick that we learned whilst doing it. But there was quite a bit of variety in this fight. Like the 2 separate ones with the hand slams in second phase. Although it's not too bad, because wherever your position is in second phase, if you're on the edges of the platform and you make sure to get rid of the pumpkins before they can drop the projectiles, then like the hands can't hit you. The hands can't hit you, so second phase is pretty much free, just as long as you focus on getting rid of the pumpkins. Third phase is a bit more interesting, as you have to deal with the ghosts coming up from above, which always goes to a parry ball, which is nice for building up EX stacks. As well as you have to be more cautious on when you're getting rid of the ghosts, because those parry ball schools will then also activate the platform you're on to move it if you're doing the wrong position, which we've done in a few times, and You can save it with the lightning, as you can smoke dash through it, but it's not reliable. And then final phase is alright-ish. I enjoy the fight, but I'm not a huge fan of any particular phases of the fight. It's just a nice overall fight to do, but I don't think anything really stands out. The final phase, just you have to walk in between the projectiles. It's a bit like a trickier version of the onion from the root pack fight, with the like bone boomerang that appears every now and again. But as long as you've got the audio cue of noting when that appears, it's not too much difference. So Phantom Express I enjoyed, but it wouldn't probably go in A tier. Probably below. Probably below Robot. Okay, to the final two, the big bads of the game. King Dice. Not a fan, in fairness. The thing that I enjoy about King Dice is obviously the variety, the amount of mini bosses. There's 9 mini bosses you can choose from, and if you can get your dice rolls consistent, then you can choose which ones to go through. Which the order we did, which was the 2, which was the poker chips, the 5, which was the rabbit, and the 7, which was the ballerina. Which with smoke dash makes everything like super simple, because you can pretty much get rid of avoid all attacks. So the nice thing of the fight is that variety though of experiencing all these different fights, especially in your first playthrough, to see the variety in the mini bosses, the flying levels, moving platforms, pretty much everything you've come across, just like an easier version, as all of them have got like less health. For obvious reasons, that you're going to be fighting at least 3 mini bosses before King Dice himself. The problem is, or I found is, because they've got low health, it's sort of just a sprint through them to get to King Dice, and then King Dice is just a parry thing. You're just parrying across the cards, and once you got that down, there's not too much to the fight really. Especially for the no hitting, like King Dice was one of the easiest fights in this, with only hits coming from me panicking with parry and stuff. So unfortunately, considering I actually really enjoy the character and he's got an absolute great theme song, I can't actually put him too high because I'm not a huge fan of the actual fight. So yeah, no hit perspective, I actually have to put King Dice pretty low in fairness. I'll put him above Werner because of like the variety of... Actually, I'll put him above the B. We're not having the B being better than King Dice. There we go. I enjoyed the devil fight. He has a lot of complexity, which I enjoy from like no hit perspective, from learning the complexities with him. Like having 6 attacks in first phase, having a very tricky third phase where your positioning matters hugely, to the point of sometimes being a bit iffy in terms of how you can get screwed over. And third phase or final phase isn't too bad, you're just positioning right. But the first phase is super strong, learning the different varieties, how to avoid everything, especially with a couple of things like the goat attack they can do. Knowing how to deal with that with an EX attack, which is alright because you can pause in the air, or having to deal with it as you enter the fight because then you don't have an EX attack to pause yourself and you have to use the dash and dash in a particular way. But I really enjoyed the devil and do think he is probably the trickiest fight in the entire game, as well as having to deal with like the mini devils at the start. Learning all of his attacks in first phase. Second phase is like a little bit of a chill out session. You're getting used to the poker chips falling from the sky, which in fairness I'm not a huge fan of because of Salt. Because I've jumped into them way too many times. I also like the little variation with the parable mobs in second phase, where they'll explode if you leave them too long or if you strike them, which is a little bit of like Grim Phase 3, just with extra dynamite it seems. But yeah, I think Devil's like a really nice fight and took probably the biggest amount of practice to get consistent. Yeah, I'd put Devil at top. I think, yeah, I'd put Devil at top, which final boss is quite nice actually. But yeah, is there anyone I would change? I don't think so. Baroness could probably go like bottom level of A. But no, yeah, phase 2 does drag her down. Cuphead, tier list, that's where I put everything. If you have any thoughts, put in the comments below or let me know how you would rank everything. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I think that's a good list of it. I've enjoyed Cuphead whilst playing it, and one day we'll go back to like doing expert stuff. But for the moment, that's my thoughts. And yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed.